Welcome to everyone. We are here to present to you about anxiety, as you can see. This presentation, or the content of this presentation, we've been presenting throughout the year. I'll introduce myself first. My name is Smira King. I'm a psychologist for the Lester B. Pearson School Board, and I'm a co-coordinator of the Center of Excellence for Mental Health. We have presented this topic as well for parents who learn Quebec. So maybe some of you have been participated or have seen the recordings. This has a different twist to it. We are catering it more for schools, and it's a topic that we're very passionate about. We really want to transmit the information and have the shift in thinking on how we can help students with anxiety, because this is one of the big issues that we're seeing within our schools and within our students. So I'll let Jana introduce herself and give you some more information about housekeeping.
Thank you, Smira. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Jana Gillis. I'm a mental health and family outreach consultant at the Lester B. Pearson School Board and co-coordinating the Center of Excellence of Mental Health. We're really excited to continue to share this topic, as Smira said, one that we're very passionate about and a topic that is of great importance today. A couple things, I can see that we're, a group of about 30. We want to make this as sort of interactive and meaningful as possible to you. So we really encourage you to throw your comments and questions into the chat as we go. We could absolutely stop and clarify and answer and engage in that way. And we're also going to have opportunity to break into small groups, because I think it's really important to sort of mull over, what we're talking about today, and to have the opportunity to share our real experiences that we find ourselves in within our schools. So we encourage you to lean into that with us. And I'm going to send it back to Smira, and off we go.
Okay, yes, we'll begin. I am trying to change slides. Wait a moment. There we go. So this is the outline for our presentation. This is what we're going to cover. We're going to start with an overview of how to understand anxiety in a bit of a different way. Some of the new ways of looking and of being able to understand what anxiety is, where it comes from, how avoidance within anxiety maintains and amplifies it. We are definitely going to introduce best practices in responding to anxious students. That's one of our most important parts of our presentation. And we'll also provide examples and some concrete ideas on how to deal with situations. Hopefully you'll get some practice throughout this workshop. Okay, so what is anxiety? So one of the best, I think, definition that I've seen for anxiety over the years where we've been talking about anxiety and exploring anxiety is this particular definition. It's the overestimation of a problem and the underestimation of your resources to deal with it. So you're faced with a challenge, or a student is faced with a challenge, a problem, a demand, and you think you can't deal with it. You underestimate that you can deal with it. You don't know how to deal with it. And that, in a sense, creates the anxiety within us. In addition, we need to think of anxiety as an emotional reaction. We all know about the stress response and how anxiety elicits different emotional and physiological reactions in our body, and we call that emotional discomfort, right? It could be fear, it could be worry. And those physiological reactions, what we call the stress response, is an internal state that doesn't feel good. And this is really important, and we'll get back to it, because when we're talking about kids and young people, that is really what motivates them to not deal with the anxiety, right? They don't like that feeling. That feeling is very unpleasant. If any one of you has ever felt anxiety or felt the fear, the feeling of worry, and how it sort of, manifests in your body, you don't like it. You want to get rid of it. So we will be talking about that as well a little bit more. And the last aspect, which is something that is less well known, is that when we're talking about children, and particularly young children, anxiety is actually an adaptive response that is designed to elicit care. And I'll explain that a little bit more in detail, because I think this is the part that we really want to convey to you and for you to understand. So really, if we look at anxiety as an interpersonal approach to childhood, right? It's that feeling of anxiety that we feel as adults is not the same as when young kids, young toddlers are experiencing the so-called anxiety in early childhood. So a child who's feeling anxiety, and you can see it in the picture, he sees a big dog, he's scared, that elicits anxiety, right? And that doesn't mean there's an anxiety problem. The child is reacting very normally. And that reaction is adaptive, meaning we evolve to have that reaction because when there is a danger, when there is a problem that a young child needs to address, they can't address it on their own. They need the adults to be able to support them and to take care of them. Otherwise, they won't survive, right? So that adaptive response comes in a way that the adult then sees the anxiety, sees the reaction of the child, and provides that secure feeling and protects the child from whatever danger there is. So we don't see it as a problem when we see a young child elicit that kind of reaction. But we do know that when kids do develop significant anxiety problems, as they get older and older, that usually is related to that interpersonal or social signaling that doesn't seem to be appropriate for what the child needs. So in this particular picture, you can see the mom is calm. She's picking the child up. She's soothing him. You can imagine how different this would be if the mom would be, upset herself, freaking out, running away, or maybe signaling to the child that he has to be afraid, that this is something that elicits fear. And that's how the fear will develop rather than diminish over time. Because ultimately, we want kids to slowly be able to self-rely on themselves to deal with anxious situations when they can, right? And that takes time. That takes development. That takes years sometimes. But we have to start somewhere, right? Just like it is very important for kids to learn how to dress themselves or feed themselves and to be able to be self-sufficient in those areas. We gradually do that over time as kids grow older and older. So for example, a young child can't feed themselves when they're 6 months old. But as time goes by, they learn to pick up food with their fingers and then maybe with a spoon and eventually even cook their own food when they're 17, 18 years old, right? So that's the progression. And that same progression is important with the way we react and we support our children through situations that elicit anxiety and worry and fear. So, having said that, we're talking now about what really we need when we're feeling anxious. So once we are developing this anxiety or we're feeling the anxiety around things that are not necessarily dangerous, there's no dangerous dog, there's no predator out to get us, but we feel the anxiety, we tend to seek these two things. First of all, we want certainty. We want to know that what's going to happen is going to be okay, that we can control it, that everything's going to be fine. And we want comfort. Remember what I said about that feeling of discomfort and that anxiety that really manifests in our whole body. We don't like that feeling. So we want to seek comfort. We want to feel comfortable. And that motivation to get certainty and anxiety is what we are naturally inclined to do at any age. So for example, some of that comes with the way we think. Okay, so when we're in a situation that produces anxiety, again, we're not necessarily in danger, right? But we think that things are not going well, right? We don't think we have the resources to deal with it. These are the kind of things we say to ourselves. I'm going to fail. I can't handle it. I hate the way I feel. What if something bad happens? And that's when we inevitably feel like we can't handle the situation. Jana.
Yes. I really like this slide and I like the visual that it gives us because to what Zamira is speaking, we like the comfort zone, we like the comfort zone and we like it for good reason. And I think in the conversations we've been having with this topic, it's really to sort of lean in, with children and those who are supporting children, that we need to be able to step out of that comfort zone, because that's where growth happens, right? If we stay there, we tend to not produce the results that we're looking for, and that this is normal, right? There's a real normalization of the idea that feeling these discomforts is difficult. So it's an expected part of being a human being, but that discomfort is actually necessary. And that it's a requirement, for change and for growth. And sometimes just naming that can help children to feel that they're not alone in this. They're not the only one who feels these feelings of discomfort. And that we have to take these risks, that they feel yucky. And that's a hard sell, right? It's a hard sell because we don't like this feeling. So what I like to do also is help children understand that they've been in these positions before, right? As Mira said, as we're naturally growing and developing, it wasn't very comfortable to learn how to stand on your own. It wasn't very comfortable to learn how to walk, but we have this normal projection, or we naturally as human beings seek, that's this progression in growth. So when we ask kids, in a joking way, did you join this world knowing how to do these things? What was it like learning how to ride your bike? What was it like learning how to skate? What was it like learning, how to write cursive? These things were not comfortable at some point, and growth happens when we can step out of this comfort zone. So again, this growth that we talk about, it really does require taking risks, right? If we don't take the risks, it's difficult to move things. And when we talk about it requires us to be brave, brave doesn't mean that there's an absence of fear or uncertainty. And I think that's a distinction that we sometimes have to help clarify, that it means taking the risk despite having those feelings. It means that we are unsure. It means being scared and doing it anyway and seeing what the results are from that. So for someone to take those risks and be brave, there are certain conditions, there's certain sort of time and practice. This takes practice. These aren't things that come naturally right away. We're going to stick at it, and we're going to help support children through this process. So we've kind of framed things, for you as a group. So we're going to ask right now, we're going to jump into a breakout room, not for very long, 5-6 minutes. And we're going to ask you to just reflect right now on sort of what resonates with you so far from the information that we've shared. Introduce yourselves, have a little conversation about what we've chatted about so far, and then we'll bring it back to the larger group and get a feel of where this sort of sits with you guys. Thank you, everyone. I hope your conversations were rich. We weren't able to be part of them, so we're curious to get a feel for you guys. What you discussed, what stood out for you, where your conversations went. So I'm just going to ask, maybe a representative from each group just to give us a bit of a context of how your conversation went. So if you would like, we would like to unmute, and maybe someone will start with room 1. Do you want to give us a sense of your conversation?
Or if you would like to just drop it into the chat, that works too.
I don't know our room number.
Ashley,
Wendy. Go ahead, Wendy.
Okay, because I didn't pay it. I don't know if we're room 1, but I can represent whatever room we were in.
Excellent.
Maybe Deborah or
okay.
Lisa knows our room. I met lovely people in my room, and what was great
too.
thank you, Deborah, my new friends. Look, we're already getting along. So we're room 2. And the first thing we noticed is we introduced each other, and we realized we're all coming from very different positions in terms of what we do now and maybe the experiences we required. So we liked that because there were many perspectives. So we were looking at, up until now, what struck us the most. And what struck us the most, according to the little notes I was taking, is we made a distinction between anxiety in students in elementary versus high school. So we had a little discussion about elementary versus high school, the youth sector in general. We all agreed that their record, like if you look at the data at our school board, and we're assuming that many English school boards would have the same data, there is a certain increase of profile of learners, and one of those profiles is exhibiting anxiety. So whether it's a Tell Us For Me survey, whatever you're using to collect data, we all agree that we see an increase of the amount of students exhibiting whether you're a code 53 or not, signs of anxiety, okay? So that was part of our discussion. And then we had a bigger discussion at the end where we were getting a little bit more like passionate and we got cut off, was that last visual resonated a lot with the comfort zone. And in order to have growth, we need to get out of that comfort zone. And one of the most difficult things we all agreed is when you think of the parents going through this, if you yourself or mom or a dad, or could be an aunt or an uncle, if you have somebody you know who exhibits this, you understand how the parents are feeling and why they don't deliberately want to keep them in the comfort zone, but you become protective in nature and you give strategies and you help, but to the point when you don't know how to start decreasing those strategies over time to increase the student's ability to start to self-monitor and start to use their strategies. So we talked about that fine line, whether you're a parent or a professional in the school, working with the students to go to that area. That's where we started talking about the most.
Fantastic. I think that's exactly what we will be continuing along those lines. So very good. It's a good discussion. Anyone else? Did we get anything in the chat?
I can go for our team. I have no idea which number we were.
Go ahead.
Okay, so the conversation started off with how, as the presentation was going, people were seeing examples of students in their environment, or for some it was also as parents. We spoke about taking risks to grow. So the whole visual with the comfort zone and where the growth happens. But we also had the conversation with anxiety, people are like, oh, you have to step out of your comfort zone, but that can be very, hard to take. So we talked about maybe more going to the edge of your comfort zone, or not so drastically. We had conversations about what it's like, perspective as a parent, and the worry that comes with it when your child is living through this. I don't know if anybody wants to add anything. Oh, we talked about feeling anxious, about feeling anxious rather than saying the person,
is anxious. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. And we will, you guys are all touching on things that we are going to dive into a little bit more, like what you said about going to the edge of the comfort zone into the risk taking. And we'll touch on that certainly more throughout the presentation.
So shall I continue? Shall we go back to sharing the slide show?
Yeah, let's do that. If people have other comments, feel free to throw them in the chat, and we're gonna do this again at another point in time in the presentation. So
okay. All right, so we're gonna continue going to talk about what we call avoidance behaviors, which are those behaviors that we see when we seek comfort and certainty, right? We want to feel that everything's okay, we want to feel comfortable, and therefore we avoid. So the type of avoidance behaviors that we normally see with students are things like not coming to school, procrastination, acting out. Often we think acting out is a typical behavior problem. The child is not very compliant, but sometimes these acting out behaviors are a way of getting out of doing something you just aren't comfortable doing or you're feeling anxious about doing. just as refusing work can be so, and shutting down. So I'm sure you're all quite familiar with these behaviors with students at school. And to illustrate this avoidance and why avoidance is so important and why it amplifies anxiety, I'd like to share with you what we call the cycle of anxiety. So this cycle, if you look at it, begins with a feeling of discomfort or feeling of fear or feeling of anxiety. So the example would be maybe a child wakes up in the morning and feels anxious about coming to school and doesn't want to go to school. And then if avoidance occurs, so not showing up to school, allowing to stay at home or finding an excuse to stay at home, the avoidance leads to a short-term relief, right? You stay at home, you feel really good. You didn't have to face school, you didn't have to face whatever it was about school that was making you anxious. And you feel good that, at least for a short term. However, what happens with avoidance, it does not give you the opportunity to learn to cope. So you have not coped with that feeling of anxiety, you haven't coped with whatever it is that's creating that discomfort. And therefore, you haven't developed any skill. In addition, you also learned that avoidance actually helps. When I don't do what I need to do when I feel like anxious, then I feel better. Then I do feel that sense of comfort that I'm seeking. And this is why we call it a cycle, because as we avoid more and more, this cycle becomes more and more and more stronger within the child or within our need to avoid. And the anxiety just amplifies and grows to the point that it is almost impossible then to not avoid. And that's in the case or in an example of children who don't come to school. The more they don't go to school, and we've all encountered those students, we end up with students who have not been in school for a long time, and it's almost impossible to get them through the door. And this occurs with any avoidance that we do, right? And this is how we have to think of avoidance in terms of amplifying the anxiety. Even though the anxiety at the beginning was not maybe as profound, as we continue with the avoidance, that anxiety becomes so profound that the avoidance becomes almost inevitable. So to summarize, avoidance doesn't let you learn how to cope. It reinforces the anxiety, and it can also generalize to other situations. So avoiding school maybe is the initial presentation of the child's anxiety about going to school, avoiding school, but then maybe the student will also avoid going other places and facing other situations that have social context or other students or other peers. And we see that quite a bit. So here we would like to, again, stop for a moment and ask you, what do you see happening in your schools in terms of supporting anxious students? So when you see these students who are not coming to school, who are, you know, in the last discussion, you guys talked about, Wendy, about how many students you see that have these presentation of anxiety. What it is that you're seeing in terms of how teachers, staff members, even parents, what are they doing to support? What kind of strategies are implemented in your schools, etc.? So I guess we'll put them back in the same groups, and maybe 5 minutes would be.
Okay. Welcome back.
Welcome back. Yeah, for a moment, I thought I was lost after the room was gone. Yes. So I joined one of the groups. It was very interesting because 2 members of the group are in schools that the whole school is around, I think it was 40, 50 students. So I thought that was quite neat to be able to be in a school where you can really know each student so personally and address their needs so personally. Yeah. But if anyone wants to share with us some of the strategies that you've seen in your schools or you've implemented yourself with students who are anxious. Unmute your microphone because I see all the microphones are muted.
Hi
Maybe
there.
Sorry.
Sorry, we're from breakout room 3. What some of the suggestions that are happening in some of the schools that we were in conversation with is there's a one school that does a 60-second reset in the afternoon, working on mindfulness, bringing students back together. There was another school who actually run an ad hoc committee. They have conversations as a team about students who are suffering from anxiety, and they come up with suggestions about how they could help the students with different with their different needs. We were with our own school here, we were thinking maybe just to have a physical room set up like one of the other schools where students can go in and reset themselves with just somebody supervising them, maybe a classroom with a fish tank in it, or stuff like material, that calming material, maybe quieter lights, maybe something sensory, maybe something scented, depending on whether or not you are a scent-free school or not. That probably could work. Those are some of the things we were talking about.
Anybody have anything else that they want to share?
Oh, I was freezing and I couldn't speak. You guys were all frozen. I had to reboot, then go back in. So I heard all the message, what she mentioned was really interesting. But coming from the north, sometimes we have lack of resources for our part. And this is where it's really hard to really have that kind of like even classroom space sometimes we don't have. And children are actually at grade 6 level. I totally got how children are learning from each other about these, how to escape them, like how to escape a classroom. And I noticed children are actually experiencing that, and then another one goes in. So it's like a chain reaction, how they're doing this. Some of them know that this child does have anxiety, but another one is learning from it, how she can escape. That's what
Kids learn from each other very well. Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's it.
Thank you.
I'd like to add something to that. We've been talking about how some students need to reset. And I commented in my group that what I see a lot is that those particular students that require that setting, it becomes a safe haven for them to attend that room. And they almost become dependent upon it. And they keep asking to go back. However, that's not the reality. We cannot forget that we are in a school, right? So, and I find that, and the resource staff is doing everything they can. It's insufficient to begin with. I lost my train of thought.
Yeah.
It becomes too comfortable for them, and so they ask to leave the classroom, also to avoid the tasks that need to be done in the classroom.
Loretta, you make a really excellent point, and I think it's a great opportunity to actually move on to the next slide that we are going to talk about, which is, what we think we need to do when children present anxiety and discomfort in front of us. And oftentimes, certainly from my experience, I've been in the school system for almost 20 years now. And what do most of us think we need to do with anxious students? So to your point with, this calm down room or whatever the sort of solution we're looking for or strategy that we're imparting, it's fueled by the notion that we need to find calmness, that we need to feel relaxed, that we need to essentially find ways to get rid of the anxiety. That's the only way forward. And if that's our thinking and that's what children are expecting, then of course your comment about the overdependence on a space that makes you sort of find that comfort and certainty becomes very, very reinforcing. And then it can lead us as adults to do things that will not trigger the anxiety, which obviously, going back to that slide of, keeps us, sort of in that comfort zone. And what it also does is it really reinforces this belief and this feeling that anxiety is bad, right? And we have to get rid of it. If we can't get rid of it, then I can't keep going. I can't cope unless I can erase it. So it allows the anxiety to thrive, right? If we can't sort of cope with, manage these feelings of worry or tolerate uncertainty. And again, it makes you continue to want to do things that lead us to be more comfortable. So when we want to escape that, when we want to, use those strategies, it sort of can bring us back to the cycle that Samira spoke about, where those kinds of strategies can actually become very reinforcing, and they don't actually serve to move a child forward. We talked in our breakout room about, I think it was Sylvie talking about, the need to take smaller steps, and we'll talk more about that, which is part of what we want to be doing, and not sort of reinforcing this idea that unless we feel perfectly calm and well, we're not able to sort of engage in the way that we would expect students to engage in a school community.
I will just interject and say that yes, those strategies that many of you mentioned, they're not bad strategies. This is not what we're saying. Having a place to reset, having a calm corner or a calm room, having someone talk to you and help you get through a moment of anxiety does not necessarily mean we say these things are not good. And we will get to it. Those things are very good if they're used in the right way. So that's important to keep in mind.
Yes. So sort of within this vein, right, of how we can sort of inadvertently, as adults, as parents, reinforce anxiety is sort of through these over reassuring statements, or again, this need to sort of collude with, we need to help you feel better. That's the main way forward. So comments like, everything's going to be just fine. Well, maybe it's not going to be just fine. Right? Then what? This doesn't feel fine. So it feels disingenuous, right? When we make statements like rationalizing statements, like, why do you think you're fail? You're so smart. We're trying to reason away this discomfort feeling. We're trying to find a different angle to sort of convince a child out of their feeling, rather than helping them sort of sit with their feeling and work through it in a process, and sort of staying away from the content of what in that particular moment is making them uncomfortable, right? So again, this idea that we have to help them to feel better, or that we will avoid things altogether. I'm not going to, give my child, I'm not going to have them do their homework because it always makes them feel anxious, or we're not going to have them present in front of a classroom because this is too much for them. So again, these are ways in which our responses and our reactions, can serve to reinforce the anxiety in our students, and in our children at sort of any given time. So why not? Like, why not these things? What is happening? It really, again, leads us to believe that this is not normal, right? That this is something that is bad, that needs to be eliminated. And again, we really want to find ourselves using language and using a way of viewing anxiety as normal, right? As expected, as something that we sort of all face at any given time, even if at times it's stronger for certain people than others.
Anxiety is a normal part of human life, right? Of our daily life, and it's something that we really want to be able to handle rather than eliminate.
Yes. And then, of course, you know, again, we see these patterns that if we think about where anxiety can thrive and grow and sort of blossom, is when you feel that you really can't handle it, right? If you feel that this worry and this uncertainty, it can't be tolerated, right? Then it can grow and it thrives and it sort of it has the potential of really taking over, as opposed to learning that this is an everyday part of life that we have the capacity to manage and support with other people who are there to support us.
And a good example for that is that I often give is if I feel anxious about flying or getting on an airplane, and I still get on an airplane, well, that's normal. I feel anxious. It's normal anxiety. But if I feel anxious about getting on an airplane, I will never get on an airplane. That's when the anxiety is thriving in me and creating a problem, right? Because then I can't go anywhere. And that's typical for what we see often with children.
And of course, this idea that it's sort of what Samira just said. It makes you want to do things that you can feel certain about. And if we stay in that mindset, then growth isn't possible. Developing skill isn't possible if we're always sort of looking for certainty and only willing to do things that we have guarantees with, right? And we can see that in some of our students, right, who are really risk adverse. We know that growth and skill development requires us to take those risks. It requires us to accept that uncertainty is a part of life that is necessary for us to gain and grow and build skill. So just going back to this concept, you know, of emotional discomfort. So I like the idea of using this language, discomfort. We say, you know, there's nothing wrong with using the term anxiety, but we've paired it with really sort of a problematic view. If I'm anxious, there's something wrong with me. Or if I'm anxious, this is something that's bad that we need to get rid of. And discomfort is really a natural part of life. And it's something that we want children to see, that it's not pleasant, it's not comfortable, but it's something that is acceptable and we can work through it. If you feel discomfort and there's this belief you need to get rid of it, we act very differently. And I'm faced with this right now in my own home because next week is grade 4 vaccinations. And this is a perfect example of discomfort, right? The children are already all percolating. You know, my daughter tells me this morning that most of the kids are going to get picked up after, if they can make it through. Parents are coming to join them, to hold their hand, and if they can get through it, they get to leave school and they're going to go get a treat. Are you with me, Mom? And I said, no, I'm not with you. Ask your older sister. And this is an example, and we'll get to later. What do you do when these conversations come up, when these examples of discomfort, and I like to call it that. You know, it's uncomfortable to think about getting a vaccination. That's pretty normal. And we'll talk about how we can engage in those conversations around discomfort. So we don't have to eliminate it. We don't have to have complete control. We can feel the uncertainty. We can be worried about it. I'm not going to tell my 10-year-old to not be worried about a vaccine, right? But there's ways that we can manage it. And the approach that we give, that we come into these conversations with, makes a really big difference as to how children and students see themselves as being capable to manage this discomfort that is a very natural part of human existence.
And when we go back to what I mentioned regarding the interpersonal part, where the way we signal to kids how to manage their anxiety, if we do it in the correct way as children grow, and we get to grade 4 and the child is anxious, normally anxious, no doubt about it. Yes, it's a vaccine. I'm anxious about it. I'm only 10. And you've already had the experience of giving the right signals, then the parent can say something like what Janet just described and say, no, you are going to be okay, right? I'm not necessarily going to be like the other parents. And the child is able to handle it, right? And that's the key. And that's what we will continue discussing right now, actually. So what do we mean by appropriate interpersonal responding? We're going to talk about research that has been done at the Yale Child Study Center. This research has developed a program that the acronym is SPACE, and it stands for Supportive Parenting for Anxious Childhood Emotions. And it's been, going for quite a long time, this research, and it really hones in on the fact that the way we as parents or adults, the way we respond and the way we approach children and with anxiety can make a real difference in their ability to develop that skill in handling and managing their anxiety. And the foundational concept of this program is that the caregivers, again, it's the adults, initially the parents, obviously, they provide a supportive role. It's a unilateral action. Okay, so it's not required of the child to do anything. It is the parents who are unilaterally providing the support and gradually reducing accommodations. And we will talk about what accommodations are. And the idea is to aim in order for the child to be able to enhance their autonomy, their self-regulation, and their ability to handle this discomfort, the anxiety, or whatever you want to call the specific emotion. It's well supported by research, and it also has some evidence for applicability for atypical kids. And I'm going to share with you two of the books that have been published by this researcher and their group. One, the top book, Breaking Free of Child Anxiety and OCD, is a wonderful book written for parents. It is very detailed. It's not an easy read, and it requires a bit of study, but it is written for everyone. It's not written necessarily for professionals. And some of the parents who I know have read it have really, really benefited from it. And the other one is more designed for professionals, for psychologists or for therapists who really want to know more about how to use this approach. They also have their own trainings, etc. So we'll talk a little bit more about family accommodation. I think, Janet, that your part.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about family accommodations. What is that? What does it look like? But know that when we talk about family accommodations, this sort of applies to the way in which adults accommodate in general. So with regards to, what Samira showed with regard to the SPACE program and the research that is really shown us that if we sort of put the spotlight on our response and our approach, it shows that we can really help children move from one point to the next on this continuum. So again, we're not asking, the focal point is not actually on the child and them making changes. So I'll have you go to the next point, Samira, because when we talk about accommodations, these are things we're asking parents, we're asking adults to change the change that parents make in their own behavior. Okay, to help their children avoid or lessen feelings of anxiety. This is what an accommodation is. It's a change that we make to assist a child to avoid or lessen those feelings of anxiety, right? So if I'm not going to send my child to school on the day of vaccinations, that's a choice that I'm making to accommodate my child's discomfort around this. So it can be done, you could imagine the plethora of ways in which we accommodate children through participating or engaging in a behavior that avoids or lessens their discomfort or anxiety, right? Sleeping with our child, speaking on behalf of a shy child. That's something we are doing. It's not something the child is engaging in. They're not speaking, but we step forward and we do that on their behalf. It can be the way we make modifications within our daily family life. And again, we can sort of parallel this to some of the actions that we might see, in schools. So example, in the home, parents won't go anywhere without their child, or I can't leave my house in the evening because my child needs me to be present. If I go somewhere, you know, we have a big episode, so I need to stay put. That's an accommodation that the family or the individual parent is making. You know, we've got topics that are off limits in a house because it's too triggering for a child. These, again, I hope I'm sort of, you know, reinforcing the point that these are things that we put ourselves in charge of, that we make possible through our actions. So obviously, you know, we accommodate, we all, you know, many of us on the screen are parents. If we're not, we've got children in our life that we care deeply about. So why do parents accommodate? And first of all, we all do it. And some accommodations are actually helpful. We're not saying here, again, that we never accommodate. That would be sort of silly, right? There's reasonable accommodations, but that's the point we will get to, is how do we do this in a way that is productive and keeps a child moving forward. For example, if I am training my young child to get out of a crib and sleep in a bed in a room by themselves and they're afraid of the dark, well, a night light might be kind of helpful. That sounds like a pretty reasonable accommodation. I have a teenage daughter who is technically of age to go to medical appointments on her own. She's age of consent. If this is something that's too stressful for her or too taxing, I'm obviously going to accommodate and join with her. These are reasonable. Why else do parents accommodate? Well, we are sort of biologically wired to protect our children, right? That is in us from the time we discover a child's going to enter our lives. We do everything possible to protect them. So there's a natural inclination to shield our children from stress. And that's a good thing. As Zamir showed in that first picture, we have a dog, the child is afraid, that's our job. We need to be able to step in. Children need to be able to rely on us to be their protectors and to be those sturdy adults who are going to help them to feel safe and secure. But sometimes that tips over, and that's that interpersonal piece that Zamir is speaking about. Sometimes it's hard to see our children in distress in general. That distresses us in return. So we're not sure how to handle their reaction. As somebody put earlier, a very generous, you know, interpretation of parent behavior. It's not intentional. No parent wants to kind of hold their child back in any way, but we're not sure how to respond to this. And we don't like how it feels for us either, right? So sometimes the actions that we take are serving our level of discomfort as well as that of the child. And from a very practical standpoint, sometimes it's just easier. It's easier to do the things, it's easier to make the accommodation. It saves time. Families are busy. When we get into meltdowns and you know, tantrums, these are difficult. We want to be able to keep the peace in our homes. We want to live in a tranquil way. And there's also, for some, there's an actual belief that my child's not capable of this. There's an actual belief for some that this is too much for them. And that sort of goes back into that protector mode, you know, and we're going to talk shortly about how we can sort of shift that thinking, and how shifting that thinking in ourselves will change the way in which we approach accommodations, which will then change the way in which a child sort of approaches and responds to their own anxiety, because they're taking their lead from us. We're the leaders.
And that belief that we often have as parents that a child, it's very profound. Often when I speak to parents, when they have their kids who are really genuinely anxious, and you can see the anxiety in every pore in their being, and the parents they can't seem to be able to move past the fact that, no, my child, I can't put my child through this. Look how they're suffering. Look what's happening to them. We all know of kids who actually throw up sometimes from anxiety. So you have these physical symptoms that are, you know, so profound that we really believe my child is being harmed if I will put them in this situation that will create such anxiety that they're throwing up, right? So we really do understand that this is the natural inclination of the parent, but we also know that there's a way to move forward, and that's what we will share with you. So before we go forward a little bit, I want to talk about the accommodation cycle, which is very similar to the avoidance cycle. It's not any different, right? A child is presented with distress or anxiety, let's say about sleeping on their own. The parents accommodate the accommodation. Okay, you will sleep with us, stay with us the night, because that's how we avoid the distress that you're feeling. Obviously, short-term reduction of distress, child goes to bed with parent, feeling less anxious, no problem. But they continue to depend on this accommodation. And then that's just like we see with avoidance cycle, the problem worsens and sometimes even generalizes. And then there's even more distress. And this cycle becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. So before we go on and talk about some of the things that we can do and how we approach these things in a measured and doable way, let's go back and reflect a little bit, because this is information that might be very new to some of you and may resonate with you in particular ways. So we would like you to spend a few minutes amongst yourself talking about what do you think about this? How do you see this in your lives, in your schools, in your own behavior as an adult? And yeah, let's break out again. Welcome back, everyone. Yeah. So I'm going to start because we had a really good discussion in my group. And one of the things that came up was something that I think it's important to share with you, which, you know, sometimes we have so much to share, we forget to share some things. And so when we're talking about this anxiety or this discomfort, we have to be really clear that this is really discomfort and anxiety that is not born from an actual problem. So if a child is anxious about going to school, and they're anxious about going to school because they're being bullied at school and they're really genuinely afraid, this is not in that same category, right? We need to then deal with the bullying. We need to deal with the problem that is creating this anxiety. So we're talking more about kids who don't want to go to school just because they're anxious about the difficulty of studying. It's hard. School is hard. Maybe they have a bit of social difficulties. Maybe they're struggling academically. Doesn't mean we don't give them the help academically as well, but those are the kind of kids where we're talking about, not kids who are actually afraid of a situation that is genuinely might occur. Same with kids who are anxious at home. Maybe there's violence at home and they're anxious, and that comes from a very difficult situation at home. We need to address the problem rather than to address the anxiety. So I just wanted to bring that out and clarify. So having said that, maybe somebody wants to share a little bit what your discussion brought about in terms of accommodations and some of the things we discussed. No takers today?
I don't want to be talking all the time, but if nobody talks, I can share something, but I would like someone else if they want to. I also appreciate you as speakers and understand. So I'll ask other people first. If nobody steps forward, I can say something.
You can speak for your group. What came up in your particular group?
I think that somebody in our group was very brave because she doesn't know us. She only met us today and she chose to share something personal. So I won't talk about that situation, but I will say that she did talk about somebody that's important to her in her life, and how this some of the things you said at the latter half, and she did share some things with us. So I don't want to talk about that, but I want to say that she felt safe enough to have that discussion with us, and it goes to the fact of what we all know. It is not innate and it is not easy for a parent, for example, to gradually give the space to gradually make the decisions that you feel are the harder decisions to make. Example, I'm not going to fight about this with you anymore. I'm just going to let them have, because if not, I know it's going to lead to A and B and C. And it'll be a lot easier if I just do this. But the more we do this, we recognize it's a pattern that is preventing growth. And that is very big when a parent can see that, knows it, and understands it. That's number one. But it's the difficulty in moving forward is what was
Absolutely.
expressed. And I thought that was very eye-opening, and you know, it's privileged to hear somebody talk about that. So that's something I just want to say to my group member that I just met today. And the other thing we just spoke about is there's also nice success stories, and I just chose to share something about a student and how hard it was for us, but I reiterated that we must think outside the box. So I understand that this is your job, this is your role. I'm an assistant director, that comes with a lot of different roles. But I do things that are not part of my job because I know that it's going to support my professionals who are dealing with this. And I know in the end, it's going to help that student. And I'm not saying that means everybody has to do that, but because I did that and came out with a lot of creative ideas to get this student out of her house, and I thought, I'm going to bring this homebound tutoring here. Step one, before she even goes back to her school, let's see if she can do homebound tutoring here at the school board. Oh, that's a good idea. I said, yeah, but it's not going to happen if somebody doesn't reach out and develops a connection. So I talked about the phone calls I made. I start talking to mom. Then with mom, I'm like, do you give me permission to talk to, I'll just say Wendy. Do you give me permission to talk to Wendy? I'd love to get to know her a little bit on the phone because mom, the goal is to get her here. That's our next step, but I can't do that if she doesn't trust me. So then it was random phone calls to Wendy. How's it going today? Just checking up on you. I can't wait to meet you one day. And I hope that one day you'll be able to maybe think about doing some of your work here at the school board. And I knew she had to do examinations that were Mel's exams, so she couldn't do them at home. And I knew she wouldn't be able to do them at school. So if she could at least come here and start, I could hopefully eventually get her next step to go to the school. And luckily the school is in eye-shot distance of the school board. I can touch the school, it's next door. So it took us months and months to help not just her, but the mom. Mom would come in, mom would be with us. I'd say, hey, mom, how about you wait at the reception and read a book? Hey, mom, how about you? It went from mom being with her to mom being at the school board in a room to mom being at the school board at reception to me saying, let's go chat outside. Let's go get a coffee. I literally took her out for coffee. Stay in your car. So all these things, believe it or not, because poor mom was so like nervous and scared for her daughter. But when she wasn't there, I saw the daughter was able to do these things because there was an energy that they fed off each other. And you have to be so respectful of that and not criticize it, not judge it, but learn how, I guess, to deal with it and help them move forward. So you're not just working with the child, you got to work with the parent too. So I guess I stress, think outside the box and talk to the team centered around and try to really have a multidisciplinary team approach when we can.
Donna, maybe you can talk to that because you've had quite a bit of experience.
Yeah, yeah. Winston, I'm just noticing you unmuted. I just wondered if you had a comment to make.
I wanted to add on to Wendy. We were talking about that. Sorry, I fell off. We were talking about the idea of the anxieties. Our children, our students, are people that we're supporting. If they're not feeling comfortable enough with us and they are seeing us anxious on how we're helping them sort their own anxiety, exactly what Wendy was saying is they're going to build off of our anxiety and then add our anxiety on top of their anxiety. So before we can help that person or those students or whoever may be get over their anxiety, we have to come in with pretty much a blank slate of no anxiety or very little and hide it so those people can get ahead of their anxiety.
Very well said, both of you, and we will talk a little bit further when we get to, what do we do knowing all of this information, and both of your examples feed in super well to that. The idea that, Wendy, we have to think outside the box, and there's a role to play. That role I wrote down, like home and school connection, home and school communication, that was so key. If we left it to the family alone, that wasn't feasible. And there's more to it than that. It's helping that student see that we have a belief in them, that we are there to support them, that we're not afraid of what they're afraid of, right? To your point too, Winston, like we're coming at it with a sturdiness that says, we got this, we can do that, we can do something.
Exactly.
And being patient. I like how you said, Wendy, this took a long time
It
because
did.
severe anxiety to the point where a child's not coming to school, that we don't go from not coming to school to coming to school, right? It takes
Yeah.
all these steps in between.
Yeah.
But what we do know is that anxiety is incredibly, incredibly treatable and incredibly receptive to intervention when intervention is done at a pace that is, as someone said earlier, I think it was Sylvie, like pushes us to the edge and then can get us a little bit further and a little bit further and a little bit further. But if we backslide into the over accommodations or not using accommodations appropriately, or we don't actually believe this is possible, then we're not able to sort of carry that along with our students and their families.
Can I add that it's so hard, you become very protective of the student that you are starting to see progress with and you see is struggling and you know you're doing your best to help them. And I'm going to be very honest to tell you that my psychoeducator stepped in and said, hey, Wendy, I haven't seen a director get this involved in a case. I know you're missing the schools, but you need to remember that at some point, she's going to start now focusing on you, and you could be the one preventing her from growing because you still walk her to the car. You still walk her, and eventually she needs to do that walk from the car to the board without you outside. And if it means you waiting at the window, you wait at the window. Then you wait at the reception. Then you don't wait. You go downstairs and she comes to the room. And when she starts school, you're not walking her to school. She's going to have to do it. So... And I needed him to remind me of that because we would have plateaued if I didn't listen to the other people on my team.
You have a good team. Okay, so I'm going to go back to sharing. Where were we? Here. Okay. So where were we? Yeah, so evidence-based treatment. So there's a few steps what we sort of cover in terms of what is the treatment or what is the approach. One, what we call psychoeducation, or the role of what we just talked about, the role of accommodation. That's really what we mean psychoeducation, teaching you about what anxiety is, teaching you about how it works, and teaching you about avoidance. That's in the realm of psychoeducation, which we are doing right now. And then to support in learning how to minimize the accommodations. This is actually what Wendy was talking about, how we slowly minimize and avoid reinforcing the child's anxiety. And in the SPACE program, it also requires not only us in the schools to do it, but a shift in the way parents are responding and supporting the parents so they can do the same thing that we are doing. That's the engagement between family and school. Generally, what I want you to keep in mind from everything that we talked about is that what we want really kids to learn as they grow older is that they can cope with anxiety and it's okay to feel anxious sometimes. And if they can have a mindset that is in that realm, that's already a step forward in their ability to cope and to handle. So what we often see, how we typically respond, we talked about it, we provide reassurance, sometimes over-talking, like taking the child aside and just endless talking, trying to convince them that everything's going to be okay, right? And that's really over-reassurance. Often sending kids out of the situation, somewhere safe, somewhere calm, somewhere where they don't have to deal with the anxiety. So it's again a bit of an avoidance. A lot of times kids ask for permission to leave classrooms, or we allow them to do things differently and generally avoid them. So how are we going to shift from these things? And like I said, not all these things are necessarily bad. They're not necessarily things we shouldn't be doing. But how do we take these things and make them work in a way that is really supportive for the student? So actually, we're going to talk about that. So we'll skip that and go directly to what do we do?
Yeah, so we talked number one about just this idea of educating ourselves, educating students, educating parents. And a large part, Zamira commented on at the beginning, was we've done a workshop of this nature to the parent community in the fall, a 3-part series where we went through a lot of what we're sharing with you today. And it was incredibly well received. It was incredibly well attended. And a lot of parents felt, as this approach does, is it gives the adults a sense of empowerment, that there are things we can be doing within our own actions that are going to help serve our children. So the second, the psychoeducation being one, but the second part is, how do we actually support? And I think just shifting that notion that support is not those things necessarily that Zamira just shared. We think that sort of, the avoidance is support, overly reassuring, talking things to the ends of the earth, that we are supporting by, essentially over accommodating. We're now seeing that this isn't what support actually is. Support is a mindset. Support is, to Winston and Wendy's points, there's first and foremost, there's 2 components. There's an acceptance from us as the adults, an acceptance that this is real for a child, or a student or a young adult, that this is something they're actually experiencing. This is something that feels yucky. This is something that is causing them distress. So if we don't first and foremost believe that, and some people, we're talking about a lot of like over assuring and over accommodating, but some adults can be quite dismissive. That's not a real thing. Kind of suck it up, move on. Your brother can do it, or you were fine last week. So these kinds of messages of just sort of toughen it up. This is, sometimes we think that kind of kick in the pants, as some people will say, is what a child needs, but this is not accepting where they're at. And when we accept that it's real for them, despite our thoughts about it, we can validate that experience. So, we want to accept and validate this is a real thing. And we want to insert the confidence that we have in our student, in our child, that there's something we can do to push you a little bit further, to tolerate the discomfort a little bit more than what you have previously been doing. That's what we call support. It's marrying those sort of 2 things together. So an example would be, this morning in my home, when my daughter says her little spiel about, the vaccines, and I say, well, it makes sense that having, a needle put in your arm makes you sort of feel scared. That makes sense. I believe you that everybody's sort of buzzing about this. And I know you're very capable of managing these situations. I know that you're capable of doing that. I believe in you. It won't be fun, but you can do it, and you'll get through this, and you'll tell me about it right when you get home. So we're not trying to persuade. These aren't persuasive statements, right? I'm not trying to convince you. I'm actually showing you in my confidence in you. And I think, Winston, to your point, if I were to lean into that differently and say, oh, listen, everything's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. Everybody does it. It's, your siblings have done it. Everyone in the school is going to have to do it. I'm trying to sort of like outthink this yucky feeling. That's not the point. I'm not trying to persuade. It's not, and we're not debating it. We're teaching and showing our kids that we can handle these things. And it doesn't even necessarily mean we're going to have success in these moments, right? If my daughter goes and doesn't succeed and she leaves and comes home and says, I didn't get the vaccine, right? It's not about this. It's about sort of the belief that we have and what we're conveying to our children, that we have a belief that they can do this. And that is a real mindset that we come at. And the whole adage of sort of like, you fake it till you make it, it makes a big difference. When you called Wendy that student, and the way that you described your tone with her and your words, it says to her, I believe in you. We're not joining her in the anxiety, and we're not trying to sort of over reassure or convince. So it can sound like different things, right? It can sound like, I hear you, and this sounds really hard, but you're going to be okay. Let's give it a try, right? Or we're acknowledging that, yeah, anxiety's showing up again. That's familiar. This is a familiar space that we find ourselves in, and it doesn't feel good. And I believe that you can get through it. it says a lot when we can approach children and students in this way.
And when we see it in schools, if we have students who may, be presenting in a classroom, for example, with, something difficult, we see that with elementary school kids often. Something difficult is being given to them, and their go-to is maybe to put their head down on the desk, or I can't do this, or, some kids might even just throw the sheet away if it's something that they feel is way too much for them to handle. And then our go-to would be, okay, let's get somebody to help you. Or maybe even punitive, you can't throw things, you can't do this, and we respond in that way. Again, we're not validating the situation. So a teacher who knows her student very well and knows the student is going to react to this particular subject matter, this is something that they struggle with, will say to the student in the same manner, I know this is hard for you. I know this is hard, but I know you can try, right? It's not about, I know you can do it and you'll get a good grade at the end. It's really just about, you can try. That's all my expectation. I understand the anxiety you feel around this math problem or around this task, but I know that you can at least try. And that's very different than saying to students, you need to do it, or you're going to get a good grade, just work the hardest that you can, which is often what I hear people say. If you work hard enough, you will get it right. But sometimes students work really, really hard and they don't get it. So we're not about giving them guarantees. We're just about them having to accept that the feeling that goes with this particular task or event that's making them uncomfortable is something that they can handle. And that's very, very different than how we often speak to kids.
Yeah, and we can go to the next slide, Samira, and I would add, as a parent who has been tasked with supporting my anxious children, this approach has really shifted the way in which I respond. Because when I think about the acceptance and validation paired with confidence, I think I've always been good at accepting and validating, and I would think most of us on this call, that's a skill that we've developed. We work with youth, we work with children, we work with people, we know how to do that. When I was able to insert the confidence piece, it actually kept me from over talking. It kept me from getting sucked into the topic, whether it's a vaccine needle, whether it's a test, whether it's a hockey game. It keeps us out of the content of the worry, because that's not what we want to focus on. We want to focus on the process of managing and coping with the yucky feeling. So it also kept me away from these traps we can find ourselves in of over reassuring, overdoing it, over talking, trying to find fixes, trying to appease, and it kept it in it just kept things simple, right? And the message that children really need to hear is, yep, this isn't fun and we can do this. And I think we do spend too much time analyzing and picking things apart, and that is not what we now know are the most helpful ways, to deal with and manage anxiety. Because it doesn't matter if it's a dog or spiders or tests, these things can jump around. We get lost in that content. And again, we want to remind ourselves, how do I help this child cope in the moment with the feeling and the discomfort that they're having?
Often adults make the mistake and parents often say that to me, if I could only find out what triggered this, what brought on this anxiety, why my child is anxious about this or that or the other. If I find the source, then I will be able to know what to do and fix it. But the source doesn't matter anymore. Sometimes the source was something completely different, and now the child is presenting with anxiety in a completely different thing that occurred maybe a year ago.
Yeah, and in that vein, the idea of, if I can just find the right words to convince them that things will be okay, or this isn't as big of a deal. And that's not what it is. It's not finding the right words to convince, right? It's finding the ability to manage and help children understand that we're actually not trying to get rid of the feeling. That was a bit of an epiphany at one point when we're talking about things, and then my child says, but I still don't feel, it hasn't gone away. And I said, but it doesn't have to go away for us to be able to get through it. So that notion of, we're not trying to end these feelings, we're trying to accept them and move past them and push ourselves a little bit further so that our coping can be that much stronger step by step. Okay, the other piece is about accommodation. So I think we've helped people to understand that we're not saying accommodation shouldn't exist, but I think what we often see, and I'm glad I'm seeing in this call, that there are accommodations that are taking place that are very well established and very reasonable, but sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're quite inappropriate. And we know through the research that, you know, inappropriate accommodations are very ineffective at helping students manage anxiety, and that they need to be transient, meaning they need to have a goal and they need to be able to move forward. What I've seen often is that we tend to make an accommodation and leave it at that, right? We know certain accommodations are very, very important for things like, you know, learning difficulties. If you have a student who requires, you know, tech to help them with their reading and writing skills, they may require this for their entirety of being a student. That's an accommodation that might be more fixed, and that's reasonable. We have a child with, you know, a physical disability, and we've accommodated and modified things to meet their needs. Obviously, these could be fixed. The problem we've done is we've gone and lumped the ways in which we respond to anxiety in the same manner that we manage and support these other things. And it really shouldn't be in that category. We need it to be more fluid than that. So, you know, Zamir and I have talked about, you know, a student who just feels very overwhelmed and anxious to go to phys ed class. So the accommodation is, well, then she doesn't go to phys ed class, and we'll leave it at that. And we think we've found a remedy, and we think we've sort of solved the problem, but we've actually taken this notion of accommodation and used it in a way that is not helpful for this child in moving them forward and helping them gain the skills necessary to cope in the world that they live in.
Sorry about that.
So I like this this quote: when an accommodation is maintaining avoidance and facilitating increased impairment in an anxious child's functioning, it is unhelpful, right? And that's something we need to be mindful of and be looking for and asking ourselves, how are we using this accommodation? Are we using it properly? And what do we maybe need to tweak in order to help a child? And again, we're asking ourselves, are we promoting an increase in functioning? Are we teaching coping? That's our goal. Or are we promoting more avoidance and a decrease in functioning? So that point that someone made earlier about, it's great to have a space where children can go, but the way we use this space, the way we use this accommodation, are we actually promoting increased functioning, or are we actually increasing more avoidance and a decrease in functioning? And it doesn't mean we don't ever use that space, but there's ways that we shift that accommodation to gradually move that child forward and gain their coping skills.
So when I sit at a resource meeting or around the resource table, we talk about a student who has anxiety, and we discuss how to support the student. There's different components, but when we're just talking about the accommodation, these are the questions I pose to the team. Accommodations can be helpful. It does work to some extent, but how is this accommodation going to be implemented in a way that will help move the student forward in their ability to function in the area that they're not functioning right now? And I think, Wendy, you described a student who's not coming to school, and that's a really good example of step number one, you come to the school board.
Yeah.
Step number two, you come to the school board independently, right? And maybe step number three, you will maybe just go to your homeschool just to say hello and then leave, right? Not necessarily stay for the day or even attend a classroom. So the increments can be as small as you need to make them. And the accommodations can be sometimes seen even almost unhelpful. Like you would say, why is she going to the school board? Right? But as long as in your mind you understand that this accommodation, she's not going to go to the school board for the next 3 years, right? This is a transient. This is where we use the word transient. It is a stepping stone. And that stepping stone is going to be moving forward to the next stepping stone until hopefully the student is able to attend their school in a more functional way as a student needs to. So those are the questions that we really want you to keep in mind when you're thinking, how are we going to support the student? Because sometimes we get lost with what we've been, we've been presenting this and talk about accommodations being not very helpful. And we get stuck with that idea, oh, accommodations are not helpful, so we can't accommodate. But we really want you to be able to be flexible with the accommodations. They're not helpful in some ways. They're not helpful if they stick around for, months on end, but they can be helpful in moving the student forward. It's a very important balance that we want you to take away with and understand and maybe be able to implement in the correct way. Because I've also had some difficulty myself at the beginning in terms of how to use accommodation. When I first, started using these concepts and these constructs, even for me, it was hard to stop and pause and say, okay, yes, the accommodation is correct, even if it seems incorrect, as long as we use it as a stepping stone. So I hope that makes it a little bit clearer. So what we're going to do now is maybe work a little bit on a case. I have an elementary school scenario of a student, which will read out for you. And then we'll break out into the rooms and we will answer a couple of questions about how to support this start. So this is Mickey. Mickey is in grade 2. And since kindergarten, Mickey was noted that he tended to be a little shy and nervous in social situations and during academic performance, such as when asked to answer questions or complete tasks independently. However, with support, Mickey did not have many absences and was able to make some friends and progress academically. However, since beginning grade 2, Mickey has had difficulty adjusting. He complains of having no friends and that nobody likes him, which is not the case, has difficulty getting things done, at times has emotional reactions, is often late, and has more absences. Mom report he doesn't want to come to school in the morning, and she feels that he is stressed and needs mental health days. She also wants the school to call her when he's emotional so that she can decide whether he needs to come home. Finally, Mickey can be engaging in school and wants to learn. He responds well to encouragement and gets along well with his teachers. And I just want to note that this is an actual case, not completely made up. Actually, apart from the name, it's a case. So I'm going to put a copy of the case also in the chat, but these are the questions we want you to reflect on. In the context of today's workshop, what are the avoidance behaviors that you're seeing in this case, and how are they amplifying the anxiety? And what type of supports and accommodation you think would help Mickey?
Hey, welcome back. Well, we had a great discussion in our group. Curious to hear, does anybody want to share, or even someone from our group want to share some of the thoughts we had about Mickey?
I can, oh,
No, go ahead.
are you sure? I'm sorry, I'm not used to Zoom. I don't know where the hand raising is.
Absolutely. You
Or,
go ahead. I feel like I'm doing that.
I'll just go very quickly because again, in our chat, we couldn't see in our room, we couldn't see the chat. So we couldn't really remember all the ins and outs of the situation. But when the mother had said maybe that the Mickey had to have some stay-at-home days or mental health days or whatever, we now understood or acknowledged that that is an accommodation. and it might not necessarily be the best accommodation if then like each week he needs that same mental health day over and over and over again. But then talking about using the resources in the school, maybe those quiet places in the school or something like that could be proposed as an alternative to the suggested parent accommodation of let's just stay at home because of the anxiety. Well, how about Mickey still continues to come to school, but maybe X amount of times they can visit this space and then slowly kind of decrease that.
Excellent. Yeah.
Kind
Yeah.
of what we had talked about ish.
Very good. Very good. Yeah. Anyone else?
I could go ahead, Winston.
We talked about one is him staying at home. We mentioned acknowledging for him that it's okay to feel how he's feeling so that he can breathe, if you will. And the acknowledgement will also help his mom because her anxiety, he's feeding off of her anxiety. So all of that plays together. So once he starts being able to recognize that he can feel the way he's feeling, and then she'll see that he can deal with that as well.
Thank you. We also had a comment in our group that I'd like to share around his perceived lack of friends. And Kemba, I'll speak maybe on your behalf. You brought it up that, you know, maybe there's something to be done around peer support. I mean, Kemba, do you want to speak to that? I'm speaking for you. Okay. You know, that, you know, in Kemba's role, she was saying like what she notices is maybe there's a need to sort of create some space for him and peers who clearly enjoy this boy. But if he has the perception that he's not well liked, can we show him through some maybe more facilitated peer connection that he has supports at school, he has friends at school, and what that would do to sort of shift his perception of school, and maybe not feeling as connected as he could be and needs some help with that.
That is actually some of the things. Well, we'll show you the slide of some of the things that we've done. That is actually in there, Kemba. So yeah, good thinking. Anyone else wants to share before we share our own slides on how we supported Mickey?
In our group, we mentioned the same things that was already mentioned, but also the fact that it was with the mom seemed to have a lot of anxiety. So the idea that the school would call the mom kind of, you know, nip that in the bud sooner than rather than later, and talking to Mickey on the positives and making sure that he has that reinforcement on a more continuous basis. But I think the anxiety of the mom was pretty present in that presentation. So that's what we talked about a lot too.
I'll just add to Lisa that we felt it was important to acknowledge that mom, how she felt, but to also explain to her how important, you know, Mom, we understand why that makes sense. And sometimes maybe he will call, but that's sometimes you need to let us show him that this is a safe place. And when he is experiencing this, if you don't allow us to show him the strategies he has here in this environment, he'll never be able to practice and use them, and he'll keep leaving without being able to develop the skills that he'll eventually need and use to help himself regulate. So can you think about that, and don't worry, you'll know if something happens, but we'll share the plan with you, and you'll see the choices he has when he's feeling that. And when you see it, I know how hard it is, but here are the things we're going to do. Here's step A, B, and C, and that might make her be a little bit more reassured. I don't know, but.
So I'm going to share the screen again. Give me a moment. Okay. Because you all brought very valid points. Oops. Yeah. So here's our support plan. So we start off with meeting with parents, even though Dad was not colluding with keeping him home, etc. He was part of he's part of the child's life. So we met with parents, we outlined our plan, we explained these kind of things. We did the psychoeducation, what we mentioned to you today, why this is important, why you need to let him go to school and get him on time and be able to handle your own anxiety around his anxiety. So all that was done. We provided suggestion. We did encourage mom to send Mickey to school every day, even though it was hard for her. And like you just said, when we told her, don't worry, we will take good care of him, even if he's anxious. So don't worry. We're not going to let him, suffer, right? And we implemented a gradual approach to engaging and getting tasks done in school, which I will share with you soon in the next slide. We used the supportive language that Jana described. We practiced with, and the other adults as well around the school who work with Mickey, that we, keep it consistent, we validate, we accept, and we give him the confidence that we know he's okay. And we created regular situations that require social interactions. He participated in a group at recess that allowed him to connect with the same couple of students that we knew he got along with, and give him the impression that, they are his friends, and allowed him to experience a more, more comfortable way for him to be able to be perceiving the fact that they are friends. And we encourage mom also, I didn't put that there, to then invite these friends also to spend time with him after school, maybe on the weekend. And because he was a bit behind, he had missed a bit of school and he was struggling, we did give him the academic support to help catch up some of the things that he needed. So that was a global sort of approach to the support plan. And then the way we implemented the gradual engagement in class, we sort of sat down and we presented this to him, and we said to him, with the help of the teacher, that following a certain amount of time, the idea is that he does something and then he gets 5 minutes break. So you can do it in various ways. Here I put it in terms of questions, like 3 out of the 6 questions. It could be a matter of time. You can say you work on something for 5 minutes and then you can take 5 minutes break. Or you do 2 questions and then you can take a break, or even just 1 question. It really depends on the situation. And then gradually every week we changed it and increased the demands on how much he needs to accomplish in order to get that break. We had a timer, and he responded very well to that. And it's really individual. He was capable of doing the questions that we were given to him. He was able to do it. He's not a student who needed that much support. And we made sure we started with things that were very doable and that he would have success, and then move to things that are a little bit more demanding. And really, it was week by week. We try to implement it every week, a little bit more, until he sort of was very willing to participate, felt more confident about his ability to participate. And we really reduced, we still have a little bit of break for him, but it's really not as close to, it's usually after a good period amount of work that he's doing, and he really well deserves it. So, and the last point you see at the bottom is, alongside with this, we use the confidence statements. And I put in there as a solution-focused approaches, because we do implement them also in our schools. We can't talk about everything today, but those are the kind of things in which you allow the student to figure out things that will help them. So you work with the student on, what do you think will help you get through this, particular task? And that approach also often helps students develop their own skills and their own ability to handle situations that are, challenging or problematic, etc. So this is just an example of Mickey. I hope that, you have a little bit of a sense of what it is that we're suggesting and how to implement that. I think this concludes our presentation today. We're going to just maybe spend the next few minutes, if anyone wants to ask questions or make comments regarding anything that we talked about. This is an opportunity. I think, Jana, yes, about 10 minutes for questions and comments.
Yeah. If there's, situations that you find yourself experiencing that you want to, ask us specifically about, or obviously any of the content today, we can just maybe stop sharing and open things up for conversation.
Yes, this, I will put it here, but I will just say that on the last slide, we will share with you the slides. And on the last slide, you will see there's a link to a Google Doc. And that link will bring you to all the resources, the books, books for kids on anxiety, and some research papers if you want to look at more evidence-based studies. So there's everything is in that Google Docs if you would like more information. Yeah, and I'll stop sharing now.